It started, as so many strange things do, on a perfectly ordinary night in New Orleans. The air was thick with the usual perfume of the city, jasmine, spilled beer, and something deeper, something like old stone and damp earth. Frenchman Street was its typical chaotic self, a river of people flowing between the open doors of clubs, the sound of trumpets and trombones spilling out and crashing into each other in a beautiful, dissonant wave. I was with Chloe, who I'd been trying to get a read on for weeks, that we'd met through a mutual friend at a gallery opening, and there was an instant, unspoken current between us that it wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was, in a way that felt almost aggressive, that it was the way she held herself, a quiet confidence that suggested she knew exactly what you were thinking about her and found it mildly amusing. That night, she was wearing a simple black tank top and jeans so tight they looked painted on. Every time she moved, the denim strained across her hips, and I found my eyes tracing the curve from her waist down to her thighs, again and again, a compulsive little loop I couldn't break. Her ankles were delicate above her scuffed leather boots, and I had a sudden vivid image of wrapping my hand around one of them. "You're staring, Mark," she said, not looking at me, but a small smile playing on her glossy lips. She took a sip of her gin and tonic, the ice clinking. "Just taking in the scenery," I said, my voice coming out a little rough. The truth was, the scenery was mostly her, the way the neon sign from the Spotted Cat reflected in her dark eyes, the faint sheen of sweat on her collarbone from the humid night. I could see the outline of her bra strap through the thin cotton of her tank top, a faint, promising line. My attraction to her was a constant, low-grade hum in the back of my skull, a distraction that was both pleasurable and faintly exhausting, that we were drifting, aimless, letting the music pull us from one doorway to the next. A funk band here, a blues trio there. It was all good, all energetic, but nothing was grabbing us. We were looking for that one thing, that hidden gem you sometimes stumble upon in this city, the performance that feels less like a show and more like a séance. That's when we heard it. That it came from a smaller, dimly lit club tucked between two louder venues. The sign above the door was simple, just La Nuit, in faded script. The music wasn't loud. That it wasn't brassy or celebratory. That it was a single clarinet, I think, or maybe a soprano sax. The melody was slow, mournful, and complex. That it wound its way out of the open door and didn't so much compete with the street noise as it slithered underneath it, a cold thread in the warm, chaotic tapestry of the night. A shiver went through me, completely at odds with the stifling heat. "Whoa," Chloe murmured, her head tilting. "That's different." "Yeah," I said, but my agreement felt hollow. Different wasn't the right word. The melody was familiar. Not in a good way. That it tugged at a part of my memory that was dark and closed off, a dusty room I never visited. A low thrum of anxiety started in my gut. "Let's go in," she said, already moving toward the door. Her hips swayed as she navigated the crowd, and for a moment, my focus shifted from the unsettling music to the hypnotic movement of her body. The fear receded, replaced by that familiar, hungry pull. That I followed her. Inside, La Nuit was a cave, dark wood, low ceilings, walls stained a nicotine yellow. That it was sparsely populated. That a few couples huddled at small round tables, their faces pools of shadow. The air was cool and smelled of stale whiskey and polish. And at the back, on a small raised platform that barely qualified as a stage, was the musician. He was a gaunt man, pale in the dim spotlight, with long, slender fingers that danced over the keys of his instrument, a clarinet. His eyes were closed, his head bowed over the mouthpiece as if in prayer. That he was playing that song, the one that was scratching at the door of my subconscious. That we found a table near the back. Chloe slid into the booth, her thigh brushing against mine under the small table. The contact was electric. That I could feel the heat of her skin through my jeans. That I forced myself to look at the musician, to try and place the melody. It was like trying to catch smoke. The tune was intricate, full of odd, dissonant harmonies that resolved in ways that felt wrong, yet inevitable. That it was a song of profound loneliness. That it sounded like walking through an empty house at night, hearing the floorboards creak under someone else's weight. That it sounded like the static hiss of a dead channel. That it sounded like the feeling you get when you wake from a nightmare, your heart hammering but the details are already gone, leaving only the stain of dread behind. And I knew it. I knew it from somewhere. "You okay?" Chloe asked softly. Her hand rested on my forearm. Her fingers were cool, You've gone white as a sheet. I'm fine, I lied. Just, that song it's weird. It's beautiful, she said, her eyes fixed on the musician. It's heartbreaking. She was right, but it was a heartbreak that felt invasive, like someone reading your diary aloud. I took a long swallow of my beer, trying to wash the taste of unease out of my mouth. I watched the musician's fingers. They moved with an unnatural precision, never faltering, never pausing for breath. The song seemed to loop back on itself, a serpent eating its own tail, never repeating exactly but always suggesting it was about to. The set ended, there was a smattering of polite applause. The musician didn't smile or bow. He simply opened his eyes and looked out at the small audience. His gaze swept over the room and landed on me. It was like being doused in ice water. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, almost gray. They held no warmth, no recognition, no performer's gratitude. They were just observing. He looked at me as if he'd been expecting me. As if I was late for an appointment. I quickly looked down at the table, my heart thudding against my ribs. When I dared to glance back up, he was packing his clarinet into its case, his movements slow and deliberate. "Let's get out of here," I said to Chloe, my voice tighter than I intended. What? What? I was hoping he'd play another set. I need some air. This place is giving me a headache. She looked at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, but she nodded. Okay, sure. We slid out of the booth. As we passed the stage on our way to the door, the musician was just closing the latches on his case. He didn't look up, but as I passed, I heard his voice. It was a dry whisper, like pages turning in an old book. You remember it, don't you? I froze. Chloe, a step ahead, didn't seem to hear him. She was already pushing the door open, the roar of Frenchman Street flooding back in. I turned to look at him. He was staring right at me, a faint, knowing smile on his thin lips. His eyes seemed to drink the light from the room. I don't know what you're talking about, I stammered. The song, he whispered. The one from your dreams, the one you hear when you're falling. You remember it now. A cold fist closed around my lungs. How could he know? I'd had that dream on and off since I was a kid. A falling dream, but with no visual, no sensation of wind or ground rushing up. Just that melody, playing in an endless black void, a soundtrack to pure, formless terror. I'd never told anyone about it. It was my secret shame, a childish fear I'd outgrown or thought I had. Before I could form a response, he turned and melted into the shadows at the back of the club, his case in hand. Mark, you coming? Chloe called from the doorway. I stumbled out into the street, the heat and noise hitting me like a physical blow. The world felt too bright, too loud, too real. The spell was broken, but the unease remained, a splinter buried deep in my mind. What was that about? Chloe asked, linking her arm with mine. The pressure of her breast against my bicep was a brand. Normally, it would have consumed my attention. Now it felt distant, like a show on a television in another room. Nothing, I said, forcing a smile. Weird guy. Probably just trying to be mysterious for the tourists. She seemed to accept this, and we continued down the street, but the night had changed. The magic was gone. The other bands now sounded tinny and repetitive. My skin felt too tight. Every time a stranger's gaze lingered on me for a second too long, my heart would skip a beat. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the gaunt man with the clarinet case following us, his pale eyes watching from the crowd. We ended up at a crowded bar for another drink, but I couldn't relax. I was nursing my beer, jumping at sudden noises, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A notification for a new voicemail. That was odd. I hadn't felt it ring. I put the phone to my ear. There was a long stretch of silence, then a faint, distorted crackle. And then so quiet I had to strain to hear it, the melody. The same one from the club. It was being played badly, as if on a cheap recorder. The notes warped and fuzzy with static. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds before cutting off into dead air. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling slightly. The call was from a number I didn't recognize. The A504 area code, New Orleans. Who was it? Chloe asked. She was leaning closer, and I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive, mixed with the scent of her shampoo. Wrong number, I mumbled, shoving the phone back into my pocket. Just static. I tried to dismiss it. A coincidence. A glitch. Maybe some weird spam call? But the timing was impossible. That it had come through minutes after we left La Nute. Chloe was watching me, her head cocked, her tank top had slipped down slightly on one shoulder, revealing the smooth tanned curve of it. That I had a sudden, unbidden image of pressing my mouth right there, feeling her pulse jump under my lips. The raw desire was a shock, a flare of heat in the middle of the cold dread that was slowly filling me. That it felt wrong, inappropriate, which only made it more intense. That my fear and my lust were getting tangled up, each making the other sharper. "You're really spooked, aren't you?" she said, her voice low. She wasn't teasing anymore, she looked genuinely concerned. "That guy just got under my skin." I admitted that it felt good to say it, to acknowledge it to another person, even if I was leaving out the voicemail. "He was intense," she agreed. She reached out and ran her fingers through the hair at the nape of my neck. The touch was intimate, soothing and arousing at the same time. "Forget about him. He's just some street musician trying to be deep." She was right. Of course she was right. That I was letting my imagination run away with me. This was New Orleans. Eccentricity was the local currency. I took a deep breath, trying to anchor myself in the present moment. The taste of my beer, the weight of Chloe's gaze, the solid wood of the bar under my elbows. We decided to call it a night. We walked back toward my apartment, which was only a few blocks away in the Marigny. The streets were quieter now, the crowds thinning out. Our footsteps echoed on the pavement. I kept my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Her body was warm and solid against mine, a reality I could cling to. But then, from a side alley, a snatch of music floated out. I stopped dead. Chloe took another step before she realized I wasn't with her. It was the song, played on what sounded like a music box, tinkling, thin and horribly out of tune but unmistakable. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my throat tight. Chloe listened, her brow furrowed. The tiny, twisted melody played for a few more seconds, then stopped abruptly as if a lid had been slammed shut. "Hear what?" she said. I didn't hear anything. The alley was dark and empty. A cat screeched somewhere in the distance. There was no music box. There was nothing. "Nothing," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm just hearing things." She gave me a long, searching look. I could see the doubt in her eyes now. She was starting to think I was losing it. I couldn't blame her. We got to my apartment building. It was an old Creole townhouse, painted a fading yellow. My unit was on the second floor, overlooking the street. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. The image of the musician's knowing smile was burned onto the back of my eyelids. Finally, the door swung open. I ushered Chloe in and locked it behind us, throwing the deadbolt with a solid, satisfying thunk. The familiar space of my apartment should have been a relief. My bookshelves, my messy desk, my guitar leaning in the corner. But it felt different. It felt like the set of a play, and the props had been subtly rearranged. "You want a drink?" I asked, heading for the kitchen. "Something stronger than beer?" "Sure," Chloe said. She kicked off her boots by the door. I watched her bare feet on the worn hardwood floor. Her toes were perfectly straight, her nails painted a dark blood red. She curled them slightly against the cool wood, and the simple, vulnerable gesture sent another jolt of unwanted desire through me. I wanted to kneel and run my hands up her calves, to feel the muscles tense under my palms. The thought was a frantic, desperate escape from the fear, a need to prove I was still here in my body, and not lost in some waking nightmare. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a couple of glasses, my hand still not quite steady. I handed one to Chloe. Our fingers touched, and she didn't pull away. She held my gaze as she took a sip. The amber liquid caught the light from the single lamp I'd switched on. "Talk to me, Mark," she said. "What's really going on?" So I told her. I told her about the dream I'd had since childhood. The falling, the blackness, the music. I told her about the shock of hearing it played live, in that club. I told her about the musician's words, the way he'd looked at me. I even told her about the voicemail. I left out the part about the music box in the alley. I didn't want to sound completely insane. She listened quietly, her expression serious. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "That is seriously creepy," she said finally. She took another sip of whiskey. "But dreams are weird. Maybe it's a common melody. Something you heard on a movie soundtrack when you were a kid and forgot about. Your brain just stored it away." "And the phone call? The things he said?" A creepy coincidence, she said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. She put her glass down on the coffee table and moved closer to me on the couch. Maybe he's just a really good cold reader. You know, like those psychic guys, they say vague stuff and your brain fills in the details. It was a rational explanation, the most rational one available, that I wanted to believe it, that I needed to believe it. You're probably right, I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. She smiled, a soft, understanding smile. Of course I am. She reached up and touched my cheek. Her fingers were warm from the glass. You just need to relax. Her face was inches from mine. I could see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the perfect bow of her upper lip. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being drowned out by her proximity, by the scent of her, by the obvious invitation in her gaze. That my body was responding on its own, the primal urge overriding the panic. That I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. That I was hungry, desperate, that a claim staked against the encroaching dark. She kissed me back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in my hair, pulling me closer. That I slid my hands under her tank top, my palms skimming up the smooth, hot skin of her back. That I felt her shiver. That I broke the kiss to trail my mouth down her neck, to that spot on her shoulder I'd been fixated on earlier. She gasped, her head falling back. This was real, this was solid, this was what I needed to focus on. We stumbled toward my bedroom, a tangle of limbs and frantic hands. Clothes were shed, falling to the floor. The dim light filtering in from the street. Her body was a pale marvel, the gentle swell of her breasts, the dark nipples pebbling in the cool air, the incredible narrowness of her waist flaring out to her hips. I worshipped all of it with my hands and my mouth, trying to lose myself in the physical, to burn away the lingering chill of the evening with the heat we were generating. She was vocal, urging me on, her legs wrapping around me, her heels digging into the small of my back. For a while it worked. There was no room for anything else there.